Every city has its ghosts. Not specters of the dead, but echoes of the vanished. This is the story of one of them. His name was Leo James. He was a journalist who believed the truth was worth any risk. On the night of October 18, 2003, he walked into the fog of Baltimore's Inner Harbor, chasing a lead that promised to be his biggest breakthrough, and was never seen again. The police found no struggle, no witnesses, nobody. It was as if the city itself had swallowed him whole. For 20 years, his case was silent, gathering dust in a forgotten file cabinet, a mystery without a clue. Until they found the one thing that shouldn't have survived. They found his camera. To understand the mystery of his disappearance, you first have to understand the man. Leo wasn't a reckless adrenaline junkie. To those who knew him, he was methodical, idealistic. He carried a belief that journalism was a public trust. He worked for the Baltimore Ledger. His beat was local politics and city development, which in a port city like Baltimore, is where the real power lies. At the time of his disappearance, he was deep into a series of articles on the Harbor Redevelopment Project, a multi-million-dollar initiative to transform the city's decaying waterfront into a modern hub. On the surface, it was a story of progress and renewal. But Leo had begun to peel back that surface. His former editor, Robert Miller, remembers the final weeks. Leo was onto something. He was asking questions that made powerful people uncomfortable. He was digging into contracts, subcontractors, and campaign donations. The usual dry stuff, but he said it felt different this time. He said it felt personal. That word hangs in the air. In his final days, Leo confided in his colleague, Sarah Chen, that he felt he was being followed. Not a constant shadow, but a presence. A car that showed up too often. A feeling of eyes on his back as he left the office late at night. Sarah recalls, he wasn't paranoid. He was observant. It was his job to be observant. He told me, Sarah, the story is bigger than I thought. There are ghosts in this harbor, and they don't want to be found. He was trying to be poetic, but now, it just sounds like a warning. A warning he himself didn't fully heed. On October 18, he told his girlfriend he was meeting a confidential source. A source who promised him documents that would, in his words, blow the whole thing wide open. He packed his bag, slung his camera over his shoulder, the same camera we see now caked in the grime of 2 decades, and walked out into the Baltimore night. He was a man on a mission, stepping out of the light and into a mystery from which he would never return. The clock was ticking down on the life of Leo James. October 18, 2003, began like any other Friday. He had breakfast with his girlfriend. He was focused, a little distant, the gears of a big story clearly turning in his mind. He told her he was close to a breakthrough, that he was meeting a confidential source that evening at the Wharf's End, a dimly lit bar nestled in the cobblestone streets bordering Baltimore's Inner Harbor. He promised her he wouldn't be late. He spent the afternoon in the newsroom, making phone calls, his notepad filled with cryptic scribbles about fund allocations, shell companies, and a name circled more than once, Croft. His editor noted he was more intense than usual, a man balancing on the knife's edge of a major revelation. As evening fell, a chill fog rolled in from the harbor, blanketing the city in a muffled silence. We see Leo, pulling his trench coat tight against the damp air. He walks with purpose, but his eyes are restless, constantly scanning his surroundings, glancing over his shoulder. The ambient sounds of the harbor, distant ship horns, lapping water. He pushes open the heavy, weathered door of the Wharf's End. The air inside is thick with the smell of old wood and stale beer. The lighting is low, casting long shadows in the booths. We interview Mick, the bartender who was working that night, now 20 years older, his face etched with the memory. He came in around 8 p.m., Mick recalls, wiping a glass with a slow, deliberate rhythm. Sat right there in that corner booth. Didn't order a drink. Just a coffee. He was nervous, jittery. Kept checking his watch, looking towards the door like he was expecting trouble as much as he was expecting a person. Then the other fella shows up, Mick continues, his voice dropping. Wore a dark coat, collar turned up. Never got a good look at his face. They talked for maybe 15, 20 minutes. It wasn't a friendly chat. They were leaning in, voices low, but you could see the tension. The other man, he got agitated at one point, pointed a finger on the table. Then, just like that, it was over. The man in the coat left first. A few minutes later, your journalist, Leo, he paid for his coffee and left too. He looked resolved, like he'd gotten what he came for, but knew the price was going to be high. The final confirmed sighting of Leo James comes from a piece of evidence both mundane and haunting, a grainy ATM camera across the street from the bar. The timestamp reads 8:27 p.m. The footage is black and white, pixelated. We see a figure, unmistakably Leo with his trench coat and the distinct shape of his camera bag slung over his shoulder, walking away from the bar. He doesn't look back. He turns the corner, heading not towards the well-lit main streets, but down towards the shadowy, industrial piers. And then, he is gone. Swallowed by the fog and the night. When Leo didn't come home and didn't answer his phone, Sarah called the police. By morning, a missing persons case was opened, which quickly escalated into something more sinister. The Baltimore PD scoured the area around the wharf's end and the piers. They found nothing. No signs of a struggle. No dropped belongings. No forensic evidence. His wallet, his cell phone, and the notebook he was never without, all vanished with him. The man in the dark coat was a ghost. No one else in the bar could provide a useful description. Mick's account was the only lead, and it led to a dead end. The official theory, born from a lack of any other evidence, began to take shape. It was a random, violent mugging that went wrong. Leo, in the wrong place at the wrong time, confronted a thief. His body was disposed of in the vast, dark waters of the harbor, lost to the currents. But those who knew him, who loved him, refused to accept this. Sarah told reporters, he was being careful. This wasn't random. He was meeting someone. His editor at the newspaper publicly stated, Leo was working on a story about powerful people with a lot to lose. The mugging theory is convenient, but it doesn't explain why his source has also disappeared into thin air. Despite their protests, the investigation stalled. Leads dried up. Tips went nowhere. The case, once a front-page scandal, slowly migrated to the back pages, and then out of the papers entirely. The active file grew thinner, eventually finding its way to a cold case cabinet, a monument to an unanswered question. The world moved on. But for Sarah, for his family, for his colleagues, the silence was deafening. The hope that had once burned bright slowly faded to a dull, enduring ache. For 20 years, Leo James was just another name in a cold case file, a fading photograph in a loved one's drawer, a memory that was beginning to fade, threatened by the relentless passage of time and the crushing weight of the unknown. The years stretched on, each one layering a fine dust of forgetting over the case of Leo James. He became a footnote, a ghost in the city's archives. But Baltimore, a city built on layers of its own history, never truly gives up its secrets. It only waits for the right moment to exhume them. That moment came in the spring of 2023. The relentless march of progress that Leo had once questioned finally reached a dilapidated warehouse on the harbor's edge, a forgotten relic scheduled for demolition to make way for yet another gleaming new complex. The air was thick with the roar of machinery and the smell of diesel and old rot. A wrecking ball swung, and a bulldozer scraped at the foundations, tearing down the old to make room for the new. It was a construction worker, taking a break to pry up a section of warped floorboarding for scrap, who found it. Not with a dramatic crash, but with a dull, hollow thud. Beneath the grime and decay was a sealed, military-grade waterproof case, tucked away as if intentionally hidden, waiting. It was unervingly pristine, a stark, alien object in the womb of decay. The discovery sent a jolt through the cold case unit. The chain of custody was a tense, formal dance. And then came the moment of almost unbearable gravity, the delivery of the case to Sarah, Leo's daughter. The little girl from the old photographs was now a woman with her own children, her father's absence a permanent hollow space in her life. She placed her hands on the cool, hard surface of the case. This wasn't just evidence. It was a message, 2 decades delayed. It was the return of a ghost. In the sterile, fluorescent light of a police forensics lab, a technician carefully connected the camera's memory card to a reader. There was a palpable fear that time, or moisture, or some malevolent force, had claimed the data. But then, a directory of files appeared on the screen. Intact. The air left the room. What they found wasn't a collection of static images. It was a ghost in the machine. A narrative, frozen in digital amber. The first clip that flickered to life was a jolt of painful normalcy. Leo, in his own apartment, testing the camera. He was smiling, a boyish grin directed at the lens, adjusting the focus. "Is this thing on?" he joked to someone off-screen. This was the man, not the victim. The father, the partner, the person, vibrantly, tragically alive. It was a gut punch of what was lost. Then, the tone shifted violently. The next file was clandestine, shaky footage, the timestamp placing it just days before his disappearance. The camera was low, perhaps concealed. The location was a dim, cavernous parking garage, the sound of each distant drip of water echoing like a ticking clock. A man, his face a mask of shadows and fear, leaned close to Leo's unseen form. His voice was a frantic whisper, barely audible over the rustle of his jacket. "You don't understand. They're not just cutting corners. They're laundering money through the construction crews. The whole project is a front. It's all a..." The sentence hung unfinished, the source looking over his shoulder, paranoid. The video cut out, leaving a silent, chilling void. The narrative didn't just shift, it shattered. But the camera's most damning evidence was yet to come. A single photograph filled the screen. It was taken with a long lens, the compression making the scene feel intimate, conspiratorial. There, clear as day, was City Councilman Alan Croft, the charismatic champion of the harbor renewal. He wasn't at a press conference or a charity gala. He was in a secluded corner of a park, leaning into the window of a sleek, black car. And the man he was speaking with, his face known to police from a dozen organized crime files, was the notorious construction union boss, Joseph "Joey Shades" Marconi. The camera had not just captured images. It had captured the truth. And in that silent, digital gallery, a 20-year-old mystery began to crack open, revealing the terrifying shape of the shadow that had swallowed Leo James whole. The memory card, a digital ghost, had begun to whisper. A terrifying new picture started to develop, far darker than a simple mugging gone wrong. The footage was shaky, clandestine. Leo's own voice, hushed and urgent, from beyond the grave. He was meeting a source, a shadowy figure who spoke of money being filtered through the project, of phantom work crews and inflated invoices. It was a massive, sophisticated laundering operation, and the heart of it was the harbor redevelopment itself. Then, the camera's long lens had captured something else. Something definitive. A photograph, crisp and clear, taken from a distance. It showed City Councilman Alan Croft, then the head of the project's oversight committee, in a quiet, intimate conversation with a man the police files identified as Marcus, the Jackal Valenti, a union boss with deep and bloody ties to organized crime. They weren't on a public stage, they were tucked away in a corner of a parking garage, the body language speaking of a private, and undoubtedly illicit, understanding. This was no longer the story of a journalist who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. This was the story of a journalist who was in exactly the right place, at the most dangerous time possible. He hadn't stumbled into danger, he had methodically tracked it, cornered it, and taken its picture. And in doing so, he had signed his own death warrant. The random streets of Baltimore, once the backdrop for a tragic accident of fate, now transformed into a chessboard. And Leo was the pawn who had suddenly checked the king. Every shadow in his final hours now had a purpose. Every glance over his shoulder was justified. The man he met at the bar wasn't just a source, he was a potential lure, or perhaps a final warning he failed to heed. The camera, a silent witness for 2 decades, had not just remembered. It had accused. And so, the most terrifying question of all began to form, slithering out of the digital evidence and into the cold light of the present day. Did Leo James's camera, recovered from its dusty tomb, just solve its own owner's murder? The official story was a ghost, a hollow narrative built on absence. A mugging. A body in the harbor. It was clean, simple, and it fit the city's need to move on. But the camera refused to agree. The photos were a key to a door everyone had tried to seal shut. The long-lens image of Councilman Alan Croft, now a mayoral frontrunner with a polished smile and a grip on the city's future, shaking hands with a man whose reputation was written in the ink of old police blotters, a union boss with known ties to organized crime. It was a collision of 2 worlds that were never supposed to meet. Following the money was like tracing a vein of rot through the heart of the harbor project itself. Public records revealed a labyrinth of shell companies and no-bid contracts, all flowing back to Croft's biggest donors. The project wasn't about revitalization, it was a perfectly engineered machine for laundering power and cash. The original investigation began to look less like a failure and more like a cover-up. A retired detective, his career and reputation in tatters, finally spoke. He'd been on the case in 2003. He'd always known the mugging theory was a lie, a comfortable story to tell the press. He'd found a witness, a dockworker who saw 2 men forcing a third into a van. But his superiors told him to stand down. The pressure came from high up, a silent, suffocating weight that ended his faith in the system. Then, a new voice emerged from the shadows. A man who called himself the accountant, his face obscured, his voice digitally altered. He had crunched the numbers for the construction company. He confirmed it all, the inflated invoices, the payments to ghost employees, the millions funneled away. Leo had gotten too close to his books. They didn't just want him quiet, the source whispered, the fear still palpable after 2 decades. They wanted to make him a warning. But the camera had saved its most chilling secret for last. Buried in the corrupted sectors of the memory card was a final file, a digital ghost. Most of it was static, a visual scream of lost data. But the audio, painstakingly restored by a forensic technician, yielded a few, horrifying seconds. First, the scuffle. The grunt of physical effort, the sound of fabric tearing. Then, Leo's voice, not the calm reporter from the test clip, but raw, strained, filled with a terror that had been frozen in time for 20 years. "Get away from me." A final, sickening thud. And then, silence. But not quite. In the dead air that followed, clear and unmistakable, came a sound that placed the entire tragedy on a map. The distinct, rhythmic, lonely clanging of a ship's bell. It was a sound mark, a beacon from the past. It meant the struggle didn't happen on some random street. It happened on a pier. And not just any pier. It was the sound of Pier 7, where the old cargo ship, the Sea Maiden, had been docked for repairs that autumn. The ghost had finally given them a location. The new evidence was a key, turning in a lock that had been rusted shut for 2 decades. The Baltimore PD, confronted with the camera's silent testimony, had no choice but to pry the case file open once more. But for Leo's daughter and the retired detective, the official investigation moved too slowly. They were drawn back to the water, to the clue the camera had held all along. They went to the pier, not the revitalized, tourist-filled one, but the one forgotten by time, a skeleton of rotting wood and rusted iron. The air there was thick with the smell of salt and decay. And there it was, tied to the far end, looming in the harbor mist, an old, decommissioned cargo ship called the Sea Maiden. It was a ghost ship, its paint blistered and faded, its windows dark and vacant. It was the only structure that matched the audio, the only place where that specific, mournful clang of a ship's bell could have originated. The implication was a cold, physical weight in their chests. This desolate vessel, this forgotten hulk, hadn't been a crime scene. It had been a slaughterhouse. And the vast, dark, indifferent water around it had been the perfect, silent grave. As the public pressure built, a different kind of justice began to take shape. Councilman Alan Croft, the man whose smile had been plastered on campaign posters all over the city, did not confess. There was no dramatic courtroom confrontation. Instead, he held a terse press conference, his face ashen, and announced he was withdrawing from the mayoral race for personal reasons. He retreated from the public eye, his legacy forever poisoned by the whispers the camera had unleashed. It was not an admission of guilt, but for those who knew, it was a surrender. The final, chilling piece of the puzzle arrived not with a bang, but with a whisper. The retired detective received a letter, the handwriting shaky and strained. It was from a man dying of cancer, a former enforcer for the union, who wanted to clear his conscience before meeting his maker. He confessed that he and another man, since deceased, had been hired by the union boss to scare the reporter, to make him drop the story. They lured him onto the Sea Maiden. But Leo had fought back. It had gone too far, too fast. The confession was a dry, factual account of a panic-stricken cover-up, the disposal of the body far out at sea, the careful cleaning, the decades of silence. And so, the truth was known, but it was a hollow, bittersweet victory. The triggerman was dead. The union boss who gave the order was dead. The mastermind in a tailored suit had escaped the long arm of the law, only to be condemned to a life of quiet disgrace. Leo James had his story told, but the cost was absolute. The camera had delivered the truth, but in the end, it was a truth without a body, without a trial, and without the satisfying click of a cell door locking shut. It was just a story, echoing over the water, forever unresolved. The case was closed, not with a bang, but with a weary sigh from the Baltimore DA's office. The evidence was compelling, a narrative of corruption and murder laid bare by a 20-year-old camera. But evidence is not proof, and the threads connecting Councilman Alan Croft to the dirty work on the pier were just too frayed by time. The men who swung the crowbar were dead. The union boss who gave the order was dead. The case against the man in the expensive suit, the man whose political star had been built on that very waterfront, was, for now, circumstantial. It was a hollow victory. The truth was out, a ghost unleashed from its hiding place, but it would not handcuff itself to the guilty. Sometimes, justice is not a verdict read in a wood-paneled courtroom. It is a story, whispered from the past, finally being heard. It is a name, cleared of the taint of a random, meaningless tragedy. Leo James was not a victim of chance. He was a martyr for a truth too dangerous to tell. His daughter, Sarah, keeps the camera now. It sits on her bookshelf, a relic among modern life. She sometimes runs a finger over its cold, metal body, no longer just a piece of evidence, but an inheritance. In the end, she says, her voice steady but soft with the weight of 2 decades, he got his story out. It just took 20 years for the world to be ready to listen. This camera, it was his voice when he couldn't speak. It finished his sentence. She walks down to the harbor, to the very place where her father was swallowed by the night. It is no longer the place of shadow and decay from his photographs. It is a gleaming monument to progress, all shimmering glass and polished steel, bustling with people and laughter. The cranes are gone, replaced by yachts. The crumbling warehouses are now chic restaurants. She stands there, a silent figure on the edge of the celebration. And the irony is a physical presence, a chill in the warm air. This beautiful, prosperous place, this symbol of the city's rebirth, was built on a foundation of a single, dark secret. The truth her father died for is now the shadow that falls across these gleaming new buildings, a stain that no amount of redevelopment can ever truly wash away. The city had moved on, but it had built its future on the grave of a man who never got to see it. And in the quiet hum of the city, if you listen closely, you can almost hear the echo of his story, a permanent scar on the Baltimore skyline. Leo James's legacy is a powerful testament that the truth cannot be permanently buried, and a single voice, even silenced, can echo for decades. His pursuit of justice cost him his life, but the evidence he safeguarded ultimately prevailed, proving that courage outlives corruption. For his daughter, this legacy transformed a childhood tragedy of absence into an adulthood defined by purpose. The camera he died to protect became her key to unlocking the mystery of her father's disappearance, replacing 2 decades of uncertain grief with the painful but empowering clarity of truth. She inherits not a story of victimhood, but one of unwavering resolve, a powerful lesson for parents. Are you intrigued by this story? If so, kindly let me know in the comments section below. Thanks for joining me on this one. Remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel as I've got more intriguing stories coming your way.